Let me show you our first set of findings. The other reason I want to show you these findings, besides the fact that it kind of sets the stage, is it gives me a chance to also show how we use the same method to look at a competing model. Around the time that charters were introduced, charters, as I mentioned, are very controversial, so there was politically it was difficult and controversial to allow charters to expand. And even now, the number of charter schools in Massachusetts is capped. The legislature, the state legislature, sets a limit on the number of schools, the proportion of the budget that can go to charters by district. So there's always a political debate about that. So people are always looking for politically attractive alternatives. The leading contender is what's called a pilot school. Pilot schools were introduced not long after charters. Pilots are actually approved by the teachers' union. So the Boston Teachers Union, which is the collective bargaining unit for teachers in the city of Boston, the Boston Public School District, they agreed to convert some traditional schools to pilots. Pilot conversions employ BTU members, so they're still unionized teachers. They hire within the district, but they have a lot of freedom. They have a lot of autonomy. They can allocate staff within schools. They can set budget priorities within schools. They're free from some work rules, but they are covered by collectively bargained provisions about pay and employment protection. So we use lotteries. The pilots also involve an element of random assignment. That's more complicated. The entire Boston district uses a mechanism that was designed by my colleague Parag Pathak along with Al Roth and Typhoon Sonmez. Students in Boston are allocated to schools using a mechanism called deferred acceptance. Deferred acceptance is a market design that breaks ties by random assignment. So pilots are part of that. So we can use the lottery method there as well. This is the flavor of the QJE paper results presented in a very simple way. What I've plotted here is a charter school effect. That's the difference in test scores between students who were randomly offered or not a seat. You applied to a charter school, your number came up, you were lucky, or your number didn't come up, you were not lucky. For different cohorts, okay, so this is the beginning of the school year where you're entering 6th grade. These are middle school results, as we call them, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I'm also showing you 4th grade scores because that's a baseline. That's pre-treatment, so that's before application, and I would like to see that the differences there are small. And in fact, these numbers are all close to 0, and though you can't see it in this graph, they're not statistically significant. And then what you see is for each cohort, as we progress through grades, the relative achievement seems to be on an upward trajectory. So what's happening is the kids who were randomly offered seats in charter school, there's a gap opening up between their achievement and the kids who were not offered seats. Now this isn't quite the right way to do this. It's an easy way to draw the picture and introduce you to the idea of a lottery-based estimate, but I really should adjust this for the fact that some of the kids who were offered seats didn't actually go, and some of the kids who were not offered seats later on ended up in charter school, but I'm not bothering to do that. So we call these plots reduced form plots. These are the results. At the top I'm showing you that these are the results for math, and you can see that there are very strong gains, so that by 8th grade, kids who were offered a seat in charter schools are between 0.2 and, depending on the cohort, but especially the more recent cohorts, as much as 0.7 or 0.8 standard deviations ahead. That's a huge gain in the education world. We like to measure things in a unit known as effect size. Effect size is a standard deviation unit. And if you're not familiar with that, one standard deviation in a normal distribution is 15 to 20 percentile points. In the US, we like to benchmark things against the black-white achievement gap. The black-white achievement gap nationally in the United States is a full standard deviation. In Massachusetts, the black-white achievement gap is about 3/4 of a standard deviation. So these schools are potentially closing the black-white achievement gap in math we've never seen such an effect. It's potentially a very large effect. In English, the effects also seem to be positive, but they're more variable. This is what we call ELA, English Language Arts. You can see they're not all positive. Here's a negative one, but generally they're also, the gap is opening up. So this is from our, as I say, from our earliest lottery study. These numbers were circulated in 2009, so we think of it as old news. One thing that we did do in that paper that we haven't gone back to is we compared the charter effects to the pilot effects. Many people had high hope for the pilots, but the pilots are not doing anything. Kids who are offered seats in pilots do no better. There's no treatment effect from a pilot school treatment. So the level of autonomy in the pilot schools is insufficient to produce gains, probably because the fundamental problem in the public education system is the teachers. It's not really the curriculum. It's not really the flexibility. It's the freedom to hire and fire and guide your teachers. And the pilot schools did not solve that problem. We can talk more about that later if you like. Okay, let me show you now something more recent, because I said this is old news. Many things are going on, and there's continuous debate in policy circles about charters, and there's also a lot of progress in research. The teams that have been working on this, so my team is not the only team. Roland Fryer has a team, Tom Kane, who sometimes works with me and sometimes does his own work. Caroline Hawksby does work on this. So there's a lot of scholars working on this. Mostly, we've been looking at what we call NCLB-style test scores. So NCLB, there's all these acronyms in the United States. NCLB is a federal law called No Child Left Behind, which is kind of a stupid name. But the reason it's important is that No Child Left Behind does many things. A lot of them are bad. But one thing that's very good is that it requires all the states to have standardized testing programs that we can use for research so that we can find out what works. Having that test score data readily available, our team, for example, we have the demographic information and the test scores of every child in public school in the state of Massachusetts. And we work with that freely. We don't work with it on our desktop computers at home. We have a secure facility and encrypted data sharing arrangements, but we're free to use it for research. And that's really the first step. And I understand that there's some discussion about getting there in Spain. And hopefully you will get there, because that's a necessary first step. You got to have the data before you can do the research. But that said, the test scores themselves are not really where you want to stop. They might be where you want to start. The tests are taken in school, and they're high stakes for schools. They're high stakes for charters, because the charters that do badly on their standardized tests may be closed. So they're going to make damn sure that their kids do well on these tests. So there's going to be a lot of test-focused instruction, which doesn't necessarily translate into lasting gains in human capital and longer-term outcomes that we care about. This is too foreign, so stop me if you want me to explain some of these idiosyncratic concepts. So we think these are potentially more interesting outcomes than test scores taken in school. The problem, of course, is you have to wait for the kids to get old enough. So we're following kids who applied to lotteries for high school, and then we have to wait for them to get to 10th grade and 11th grade, where they start to take some of these courses and some of these tests. Then we have to wait for them to graduate from high school. Then maybe we have to give them an extra year to mess around, and then finally they apply to college. So, it takes a while to generate those outcomes. We're adding to this. So charters have been growing enormously. And we've got a lot of legislation going on. In 2010, the cap, remember I said that the number of charters is capped, that was lifted in part, and it was lifted in a kind of controlled way for so-called proven providers, that is, schools that can show that they have good results. Again, you need the test scores for that. And new charters were granted. They're called Commonwealth charters. Most of those have been in Boston. So Boston in particular is a kind of a hotbed of discussion about education. In fact, we'll have a new mayor in a few weeks. On November 5th is coming, so in 2 weeks a new mayor will be elected in Boston. Both candidates talk mostly about education in schools. And one of the big issues is the charter cap. Okay, so let me now show you some results for our long term. We're studying charter high schools. This is a list of the schools, their names. That's not very important. This is most of the operating charters in the city at this point. Some of the charter high schools have closed. Boston's not a very big city. You might think of it as a big city because it's surrounded by a kind of metropolitan area. Boston itself is about 500,000 people, and it has only 60,000 school children. So there aren't that many schools in Boston. We study this group of 6 high schools. These are the operating charters. One school that we can't study has poor lottery records. All of these 6 have oversubscribed cohorts. The cohort is the entry group, so they're applying for entry in 9th grade. They're expected to graduate between 2006 and 13. It's complicated here because different schools have different entry points. This is a big headache for us. 3 of these schools are accepting 9th grade applicants, 2 of them are accepting 6th grade applicants, and 1 is taking in 5th grade, even though it's a high school. So we have to find the lottery at the point where the kids are coming in, and then we collect the data. It's often a very painful process. We would like to see this streamlined, so on a separate track we're proposing to rationalize the admissions process. Each school, for the moment, each school does their own thing, and the records are usually paper records or Excel spreadsheets, and we collect them and sort of audit them and turn them into something that can be used for research. And then we match those to state data systems. This table gives you some information about school characteristics, and I want to particularly highlight the comparison with traditional public schools. We collected some data by survey on the charters, and then we have some administrative data on the schools. So what's the difference between a charter high school and a traditional public high school? This excludes exam schools. Boston has elite exam schools which use tests. That's not part of the story. Well, you can see one thing is más tiempo, so longer days. That's in the flyer. Longer days per year. More days per year. I don't know how this compares with the Spanish school year, 180, 190 days.
It's a little bit higher.
It's a little.
It's a little bit lower.
Minutes per day, the day is longer as well. And another key feature of the charters is indeed in Boston, most of the charters in Boston identify with the no excuses paradigm. I should mention, no excuses, it sounds kind of harsh. It's not about the children, that the children should not make excuses. It's about the teachers. The teachers should not make excuses. And in particular, the idea is the teacher or the school leader should not say, well, these are poor non-white children and you shouldn't expect from them. Okay, so you shouldn't make excuses based on family background.